Now, I'll talk more about Ashkenazi Jews because there's a connection to the Federal Reserve and to the Khazarians. So, what C.F. Parker says and what he suggests is that there is Edomite influence among the Ashkenazi Jews. It might be minimal, but we can't overlook it. So
Mm.
he says this. The Ashkenazic Jewry is thus comprised of three elements of not exactly known proportions. So the first one is those of Judite descent, those of Idumean origin, or the Edomites, and those proselytes from other origins, which essentially he's talking about the Khazarians. So now there's this long-standing debate, but as to who are the Ashkenazi Jews? Where do they come from? And some scholars believe they come from the land of Germany. But there's
Rhine,
actually,
the Rhineland, wasn't it? Yeah, it's like
right,
yeah, yeah.
yes, yes. But there's actually growing evidence that they can trace their roots back to Khazaria.
Mm.
So in the 12th century, there was a rabbi that recorded in his travel log that the kingdom of Khazaria actually comes from the descendants of Meshach, son of Gomer, grandson of Japheth, great grandson of Noah. So I'll connect the dots for us.
Mm.
Now, this also was confirmed in a letter by one of the Khazarian kings, King Joseph. And he writes in that letter that the Khazars, their bloodline comes from Japheth, which is one of the three sons of Noah. Now, what's interesting is that this bloodline also produced Magog, Togarma, and Ashkenaz. And so the Talmudic actually makes reference to a town near the Black Sea called Ashkenaz. But it's not just that town. Ashkenaz was used as a term to broadly describe the Khazar kingdom. And so you get the Scythians also come from the bloodline of Magog and Ashkenaz. And there's an interesting clue in the book of Ezekiel that describes the trade practices of some of the descendants of Meshach and Togarma. So I'll read that. This is verse 13 and 14 in Ezekiel 27. It says, Greece, Tubal, and Meshach did business with you, trading slaves and bronze for your products. Beth Togarma traded workhorses, war horses, and mules for your products. Okay, so in this passage,
Mm.
what it's saying is that the ancestors of the Khazars were slave traders, so they were human traffickers, and they were warlike people that utilized horses in battle. Well, this actually gets confirmed by Matthew Johnson, that professor, one of our experts on Khazaria. He wrote an article or an essay. It's called The Regime, Usury, Khazaria, and the American Mass. And so in it, he gives us a really interesting window into the trade practices that shape the economic policies of the
Mm.
Khazar Empire. So I'll read an excerpt from it. He says, in Russian history, this usury was the role of Khazaria. Charging tolls on passing merchants was their primary form of income. Domestically, the top layer of society, mostly Jewish, extracted tribute from their conquered peoples. The Khazar Empire had a small but powerful group of Jewish bankers in Kiev as early as the 10th century. Khazaria existed as a multinational state ruled over by an oligarchy of Jewish converts. Few historians will touch this issue, and with good reason. By controlling the Great Silk Road, the Khazar Jews fully seized the trade between East and West, between North and South. That is, all the trade routes passing through the Caucasus Mountains. Well, this was the main purpose of their migration to the
Mm.
region. Full control of the caravan routes passing through the Khazar Khanate allowed the Jews to establish a trade monopoly, where they began to control the prices of imported and local goods. Well, as a result, consumers were gouged. He says, according to the testimony of medieval travelers, the main source of income of the Khazar Khanate, except for usury, was the slave trade. Regular raids on neighboring lands, mostly Slavic, gave Khazars a large number of slaves, which were sold all over the world. Trade in general, and the slave
Mm.
trade in particular, has always been the source, the traditional source of income for Jewish entrepreneurs, and a source of super profits, which made it possible to get rich quick and further strengthen its parasitic power. So, this really gives us a window into the long-standing corruption in this land that's now Ukraine. And so it's been a breeding ground for Nephilim hosts since the first century. And what Matthew Johnson and Benjamin Friedman have pointed out are these Nephilim traits within the Khazarians. And so you have now these are part of the behavioral characteristics that identified as Nephilim hosts, but so they're violent without remorse. You know, they engage in sexual degradation. They're dishonest in trade and business practices. They're traffickers of humans and they enslave others. And so this is how we see these Nephilim traits in the Khazarians. Well, eventually the Khazarian kingdom got conquered by Genghis Khan's
Mm.
sons in the early 13th century. And so what
Mm.
happened is that caused a diaspora of the Khazarians, who were Ashkenazi Jews, into Eastern Europe. So rather than the Khazarian kingdom coming to an end, it actually spread.
Mm.
And then, of course, the Rothschilds are Ashkenazi Jews. And like I said, they've been some of the most influential Nephilim hosts of the Common Era. So the Rothschilds and their Khazarian mafia, they've actually gained a foothold in most of the nations of this world since the mid 1700s.
Mm.
Well, then you get so Mayer Amschel Rothschild, he's the patriarch of the Rothschild banking dynasty. Well, he formed this triad union with Adam Weishaupt, who is the founder of the Illuminati, and Jacob Frank. And so Jacob Frank actually believed that he was the reincarnated Sabate Svi. And Sabate Svi believed that he was the Messiah. So what
Mm.
Frank did is he taught his followers in these short statements and parables, essentially that all religions are merely stages which believers pass through. And he treated religion like this garment that you put on, you wear
Mm.
for a time, but then you discard it because ultimately it's of no worth. And so what he did is he encouraged people to put on the cloak of Christianity outwardly, but to secretly conceal their faith in Sabbatean Frankism.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is one of the doctrines, and this is how it all ties together.
Yeah.
So, one of the doctrines within Sabbatean Frankism is called the Way of Esau.
Mm.
And so, Edom for them symbolizes liberty in all areas of life. So, it was the road to religious anarchy. And so, in order for the Frankists to achieve this goal, they had to destroy the teachings and practices of religion. And instead, that had to be done in secret because they couldn't let their own beliefs creep out. Well, as Frank led the Sabbatean Frankism or Frankists, he led them into all sorts of sexual degradation. I mean, licentiousness, they were
Mm.
engaged in all sorts of sexual orgies. And the core belief of the Sabbatean Frankists was that the Godhead takes on human form through these human leaders of the sect. So Sabbati and Frank. And so members of this sect, they were supposed to blend in with the predominant religions, whether that's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. And they were forbidden to actually let their beliefs be known that Sabbati Svi and Frank were the Messiah. Well, okay, back to this triune union between the Rothschilds, Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, and Jacob Frank. When they came together, they essentially created a sevenfold plan for world domination. And if you just give like a high level summary of that, they wanted to abolish all national governments. They want to abolish private property, abolish inheritance. Then they want to destroy Christianity, destroy the family unit, and destroy patriotism while creating one world government and a new world order. And so essentially, you can see how this blueprint gets carried out. I mean, this is the blueprint of the Nephilim agenda.
Mm.
And that's why it's so important we understand this so we know how to break free from the system of enslavement.